Data Storytellers. Today, I'm here with Joe Rappaport, who's the analytics business partner over at Mehta. Great to have you with us.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Likewise. So I'm really excited to get into your background. Just to start with, tell us a bit about your journey, your role to becoming an analytics leader.
So I started out in recruiting, which was a terrible fit for me. Just the chest tightening anxiety of having to get on the phone and make cold calls was enough to make me not want to get out of bed in the morning. But that all changed when I started automating my job using Visual Basic, Excel, buttons, macros, and mail merges to automate my job out of existence. So I, as little as possible, had to get on the phone. And I was in a happy spot then, and I thought I was going to be in a little bit of trouble when my team found out what I had done, but quite the opposite. They made a position for me doing reporting and analytics for the talent acquisition function. And for the first time, I was really excited to go to work. And that's when I knew that HR analytics was going to be for me.
Yeah, and I can see that you've been kind of going down this route, and it's almost like a natural transition from going to like the sales side of recruitment to the HR analytics side. What makes you want to work specifically within HR analytics as opposed to say like commercial or any of the other functions that you could have gone down?
I think it's the unique opportunity that the baseline tends to be pretty low in HR, and therefore the ceiling is really high. That most HR functions, at least right now, and they've been growing in the last few years, have had limited analytics. And we see that mostly manifest in analytics teams or with certain individuals in the HR function, maybe being better with Excel, other tools, and then them being the dedicated point people for analytics. So with the kind of the whole world in front of me, it's this thriving in ambiguity that I really enjoy HR analytics for that aspect of it.
And this is really interesting. You mentioned that the benchmark is low, but the ceiling is high. Why do you think that is within HR specifically? Because when you look at the makeup of an organization, anyone will tell you, no matter what function, no matter what role they have, is that it's made up of people. It's not made up of technology. It's not made up of processes and people doing things. It is actually the people that make the business. So why do you think that the HR has kind of fallen behind in this analytics world that we live in now?
I think it's mostly just the lack of realized opportunity. That being in HR, we have so much data, understanding that companies aren't made up of systems, but they certainly do lend themselves to analytics. And just having that kind of that open world in front of you lends itself to quick turnarounds, quick wins, and ways to affect the business in positive and meaningful ways that haven't been done before.
Interesting. So specifically with HR analytics, you've been in this space for a good few years now. In general, outside of your current organization, how do you see HR analytics today? What do you think about the state of data within HR and the general progress of data-driven business transformations in corporate HR, let's say?
Yep. I think that right now we're in a transition period. Certainly HR analytics is nascent, and analytics, I would say right now, at least in the current field, is not a core competency in HR. More and more we're seeing degree programs, universities include analytics in their HR offerings, but the field as it is tends to be pretty limited, but growing. I think that's really where the HR analytics is going to be going into a more standardized, into a more common language, into these more advanced levels of analytics, thinking about what can be done in the future that hasn't been done yet. But right now it's nascent. Corporations are just starting to build their HR analytics teams. They're just starting to separate out the HRIS side, that technology-focused, systems-focused role, from the analytics where you're crunching numbers, kind of gathering it together for the business, and then handing it over those insights to make actions.
Yeah, and we had some really good conversations recently with some of our community about how analytics leaders aren't report takers; they should be problem solvers. So the how would you go about like applying that mentality to an HR analytics function?
So that's where it really does start with people. That the people that you have at your organization are the representation of what the business cares about. So if you have a strong onboarding program, then the problems you want to be solving are onboarding related. If it's talent acquisition, which every company has, then there are talent acquisition problems that you can help solve to help the team recruit better, whether that's faster, more efficient, better quality of hire. It really is a sales job, sort of taking the analytics and selling it to your internal and then external partners on ways that you can improve the efficiency of the business.
That's so true. It's funny that you started the podcast by saying, look, I started this recruiting role. I hated doing cold calls. Essentially, what you're doing in that role is sales, right? And that doesn't mean that selling data has to be like that, right? It doesn't have to be this uncomfortable process of cold calling people who don't want to speak to you. It can be more collaborative, and this is kind of where the storytelling piece comes in, right? So with that in mind, what are some of the greatest opportunities for ambitious companies, ambitious leaders within HR today, do you think?
I think that the maybe greatest opportunity that hasn't been quite realized yet that I've seen is in a bridge role between the people, your HR business partners, your talent acquisition teams, people that have that high social emotional intelligence, and the strong analytics people, the math PhD or data scientists, in the function of a citizen data scientist, someone who has a shared foundation with both groups on the mathematics side and with the sales and delivery piece. And they're able to take those analytics and then digest them down to something that is business ready, and then more complicated, more black box type analyses to audiences that, they would prefer not to divide two numbers if they didn't have to.
It's so true. It's so true. When you say like the getting the people, the people who have this emotional intelligence, which I really like with the data scientists who they kind of like to get lost in the weeds, right? When you can manage that, and when you have people who can sit in both of these camps, have one foot in each of those, that's when the real success actually starts coming. So you mentioned emotional intelligence there. What when it comes to optimizing HR analytics, what do you think are the qualities of the leaders who inspire real change and make a real impact on the business?
So having been there, I think that my advice is going to be very autobiographic, and that is trusting your team and letting them go. Going from like just a manager to a leader is a lot about letting go of the process, letting go of the individual analysis, not micromanaging, and really letting the analytics flourish and trusting your team is going to be able to reel it back into something that is deliverable to the business, something that can be digested and turned around from beta coefficients into drivers.
I think that you mentioned the word trust there, and this is something that always comes up on these podcasts. You mentioned that they're the trust between, say, you and the team. How do you go about building trust within the rest of the HR analytics function? As you said, there tends to be a high ceiling, which means there's a lot of opportunities in this function. How do you use trust to go about leveraging those opportunities, or how have you in the past as well?
So in the past, I'd say that the first step to building trust with the other functions is truly being vulnerable to them, admitting that, I'm not the talent management expert, you are. I'm not the talent acquisition expert, you are. And understanding the stories that are going on, the undercurrents and narratives that they are experiencing on a day-to-day basis, and then taking the data to shape it around those in ways that can help them. I think that it's not so much a bludgeon as it is a journey that you go along the way with them. And that's the building of the trust and then using it to influence them with the kind of, well, what am I an expert at? Analytics.
And how can I use that expertise to help you better at the job that you're already an expert in? It's not like when you were using analytics to replace you, and I need you to tell me all of your secrets, because you just can't do that. And I think essentially what we're alluding to there is the importance of the soft skill side of transformation. And again, with the data storytellers, we don't talk about tech, we don't talk about process. There's many organizations and companies out there that do that, and that's the science side. Put people into a big room together, showcase all of the relevant technology, they'll come to a decision by the end of that. But what we're talking about is the art piece of data analytics transformation. How do you go about maneuvering those relationships? How do you go about providing that value? Whether it has to be a quick win, whether it has to be like a longer term strategy, it has to be a combination of both. When it comes to these soft skills like communication, influence, persuasion, taking those different perspectives, and in general building those fruitful relationships. How important do you think that the soft skill side is in specifically from an HR context? It'd be good to
hear. I would say that it's a gate you have to pass under. You can't just have the analytics or just have the soft skills. It really is the synthesis of both that lets us flourish. I would say generally in analytics, but also specifically in HR analytics. It's being able to tell a story in a way that your audience is going to understand. And if you're losing them in the data, if you're losing them in the analysis, then you're not doing your job.
Yeah, and this is where, as I said earlier, having the foot in the people side and developing the emotional intelligence side as a data scientist will be where in 1, 2, 3 years these people are really going to scale up their own careers as well. What role did these skills play in your career as a professional? Like whether it was spreading the data literacy across HR, whether it was getting executive sponsorship programs. Can you give some examples?
Sure. So trusting that I started out at a very low level. This was there were a lot of awkward conversations, a lot of awkward meet and greets that I had to go through to understand the importance of being able to sell my work. I think the growth manifested in a couple of different ways. I think the most fun and interesting way was like understanding that at least in HR, the audience doesn't tend to be math people. They don't want to talk about the math. They don't want to hear about the math. And so after a couple missteps in that category, specifically understanding the audience as that they are at where they're at, and you have to meet them there is kind of the first thing and most important thing that I learned along the way.
Yeah, I think the old mantra of treat people like as you would like to be treated. Well, if you're an analyst and you want to treat people with the hardcore data, that's not going to work. You need to treat people how they want to be treated, at least in the initial beginning. Then when you've built that initial trust, you then have a mandate to say, here's what I'm bringing to the table, and here's why it's important for you to listen. Here's why, not why it's important for you to listen, but here's why it's in your interest to listen. That's how you leverage a data analytics functions. You humanize analytics. You show people the benefits that specifically come to them, right? I mean, when it comes to HR analytics specifically, because this is something I love, and as you said, there is this lower benchmark there compared to say like commercial marketing, and I think the reason for that actually is because these are generally more story orientated professions, right? In the traditional sense, that sales is about telling a story and selling a product, and marketing is about telling the story of the business and again selling that product from a more passive perspective. But HR isn't really it doesn't inherently have the sales skills, right? And this is why for example, commercial marketing analytics tend to be a bit farther ahead of the curve. But yeah, I mean, when it comes to HR analytics, do you see that gap closing between, say those other functions, or are you seeing that it's getting less important? Because it's something we don't really talk about a lot on the podcast. It'd be good to get into that.
Sure, I think that in HR, the storytelling aspect is growing. Certainly, the ability of the HR business partners to sit with the business and be effective partners, not just in, okay, I'm going to go enter these transactions you ask, but what are you trying to accomplish in the business that I can help you with? Those skills are certainly growing and getting better, as I've seen over the course of my career. And I think that in analytics, that is where we step in to be good partners to them and improve the quality of our delivery, of our service delivery, of what we can do to help you help the business. It really is that growing maturity of the HR analytics field, being so new, being so fresh, and so, well, I wouldn't say small. Nowadays, there's plenty of groups that talk just about HR analytics, but in the comparatively to other analytics functions, sales, marketing, we are the more junior field.
I think you're in a unique position though, where you've not only have you been in like, for example, when I think of someone in commercial analytics, the journey usually looks something like I was a data scientist or a data analyst or a data engineer or a data architect, and I kind of worked my way up through this business, another business, and then I became the guy who's responsible for the commercial analytics. But these people aren't sales guys by trade, right? I think you actually have an advantage over a lot of people where you've been in the trenches, right? And you have at least some visibility over what a good story looks like, and the specific pain points of these people, which is what people want. People want to be understood. They don't want to have to tell you why X, Y, Z is a problem. They want to be able to be acknowledged in their emotions. That's where the emotional intelligence side, as you were saying earlier, comes in as well. So when it comes to this trust building, whether it's interfunctional, whether it's up and down the chain of command, what do you think are some of the best questions to ask when you want to build that trust? What is your approach to reaching out to key stakeholders, establishing those relationships, specifically again within HR?
Yep. I think that I'm going to go back to the foundation of where building trust is about being vulnerable to the other person and also being accountable to them. So those key questions are, what can I do for you? What do you need that I can provide to start off that conversation of, give and take that starts with me giving. And that works both internal to HR, where you're talking to people that roll up under the same vice president, or outside in the business where they're going to have problems that are totally invisible to you, totally opaque, where you have to start from a foundation of, like, where are you at? What are your problems? What are you trying to solve that I can help you with? And like you were saying just a second ago, it does go a long way to have a little bit of the shared foundation of, like, I understand your pain points and we're not starting from scratch. But if you're talking into business or in IT, if you don't have that background, if you're talking to someone in marketing, you don't have that background, then really just being vulnerable with where I'm at and what I'm an expert in versus I know that you are.
Absolutely. And with that in mind, then, when you go through the soft skills side of things, how do you define that data drivenness from an HR analytics perspective? Like, what do you think that actually means?
It spurred my creativity with that one. Okay, so data drivenness to me is about the executive sponsorship into the use of data to solve problems. It starts from the top down of the interest, the excitement, the willingness to use data to solve and to steer the solving of problems. So data drivenness isn't really about me starting with the data and then going to solve the problems, because that's what I would do anyways. Data driven decision making is about everyone in the chain being on board with looking at the problem through a lens of what metrics can we solve? What the way can we use data to approach this problem and bring it to a fruitful conclusion?
And that's so key. So in that context, then, what role do you think that HR analytics leaders play in these transformations?
I think that hiring and building teams all around HR analytics is certainly the first step. That is themselves vouching with their wallet for the use of analytics in solving HR problems. But in general, just the willingness to look at these problems, with data and be convinced through analytics. I think that's really the next step of what leaders can do for taking HR analytics to the next level.
And do you think that's the biggest challenge for data analytics leaders, or do you think there's specifically the talent piece there, or do you think it's something else?
So I don't think it's the talent piece. I think that the talent within HR analytics is growing, both new graduates and people getting interested in the field and getting certifications or degrees and stepping into the field, but also the background that they come with being so deep into the business. They have this strong shared foundation that is just useful and sets them up for success. I think that certainly the biggest challenge is going to be kind of getting up to the level of advanced analytics, that degree of prediction and prescription that other fields are already at, or at least I'd like to think they are, and that we would benefit from getting there. But the use of models, the use of machine learning and AI, those are all problems that come with their own unique set of challenges in HR, where there isn't this strong foundation. And if your organization does have that, then that's leaps and bounds beyond where the average HR analytics group team function is at.
Awesome stuff. So this makes a lot of sense. And I want to just tie back in something you said earlier about being able to understand and having the empathy. I think kind of sits under the umbrella of humility. How important do you think that is? And also a follow-up to that, as a data leader, you always have to be courageous and assertiveness. So does that need to be at odds with humility, do you think?
No, the role of humility truly is to build that connection with the other individual. In some positions, you're trying to assert just force of will over the other person. I don't think that persuasion, especially cross-functional, where you're in HR, you don't have power over the business. They have power over you. You are trying to influence them with carrot more than stick. That humility is truly understanding that I'm coming from a place of trying to help, where I might be the expert in my field, but they are the expert in theirs, and you truly need to
absolutely
appreciate. I think that the true courageousness and that force of will can be a benefit, that when you're talking about numbers and analytics, not quavering and quaking, it certainly gets your point across in a better way. That storytelling itself has to be confident and assertive, but no, I don't think it's at odds at all with the humility aspect of walking into a meeting knowing what I know and what I don't.
So we've talked a lot about how you interact with the organization. How do you see yourself? How would you describe your role? If someone to someone outside the business, how would you describe what you do on a day-to-day? Are you a change agent? Are you an evangelist? Are you a steward? Where would you sit?
I would say it's part teacher and part explorer. The exploring part is looking at what new boundaries we can cross of taking data and using it in new analyses or in ways that the business has never thought about before. And the teacher part is in teaching both the HR function, upskilling it in the analytics category, and also teaching the business about what we can do with those, with that data, with that narrative, to really drive in the direction that's beneficial to everyone.
So how do you approach educating the wider HR organization on the stuff that you guys do, the capabilities that are there? What are some of the ways that you've tried that work, some of the ways that are less successful?
Let's see. So the least successful I'll start with, because I would say least obvious, and that is just trying to teach them like Excel, Python, math. I don't think that is a fruitful angle. I think potentially because it's so school-like, and people in their careers don't want to spend 90 minutes in a class just to learn something that might be useful to them. In contrast, the most useful ways have been treating the analytics themselves as if they're already uniform and understood and part of the job. And that is through glossaries where you just share common definitions so that everyone's on the same page. It's through the quick reference guides where if someone had any question, rather than having to start from zero, they have somewhere that they can go to get themselves upskilled at their own pace on some self-service dashboard where they're looking at the turnover rate. What's that? What does it mean? How do I use it? I think it's mostly about these self-service options where people can be empowered to use the analytics that are already in front of them in new and exciting ways.
Awesome. So how intentional and rigorous are you with the setting priorities, building these plans, following these roadmaps as a leader? Do you have these systems in place, or is it less scientific than that?
I think that's more driven by the business of what they need. So HR tends to be a reactive function. We would love to get to that proactive one where we're solving problems before we know they exist, before the business knows they exist. But tends to be right now that the priorities of the business shape where we do our analytics, where we're our time, energy, where we're aligning our headcount. I think that it's more about being nimble right now than it is about setting a plan and sticking to it.
Absolutely. So Joe, it's been a really fun interview. I've got a last couple of questions for you. You mentioned at the start of the podcast that you found your calling with this HR analytics piece. So what do you like most about your job? What made you fall in love with the HR side of data analytics?
I think it's just that the breadth of data that we have access to that is just not being used really lends itself to learning new skills, tools, technologies that I find. When we had survey data, long text, I learned natural language processing. When I had too many attributes in our 360s, I learned dimensionality reduction. So it's all these, the ability to learn on the job that really gets me going and kept me here.
So what are some, in a very general sense, what projects are you currently working on? What are you most excited about in terms of using HR analytics to help the business move forward?
So I think it's moving towards prescriptiveness in fundamentals of HR. I'm thinking about specifically talent acquisition. How can we bridge that gap between talent acquisition and the business in a way that really drives them forward? You hear funny stories about every time a hiring manager gets a job, the question is, well, I got this job, but I'm not sure if finance is going to let me fill it. Or, oh, so I got the job, so someone's filling that, right? I think that it's, or at least not knowing I have a job. It's really connecting that with the business and becoming more, moving from purely reactive into the more prescriptive, proactive. That is what I think that currently is getting me out of bed.
And what advice would you give for aspiring leaders in HR analytics?
Well, aspiring leaders. If you're already a leader, I'm sure that you've felt that humility, that you felt that the need to be vulnerable with others. But I think that is where you take it to the next level, going from being just an isolated professional, struggling to influence others, to being someone who is really a valued partner, someone who, anytime a question comes up, you're going to be the one they go to. I think those are the attributes and the skills that are going to take one to the next level.
Well, Joe, it's been a really fun conversation. Great to hear more about something that, in all honesty, we don't talk about enough on the podcast, which is the HR side and how we can leverage and optimize that function. And yeah, I hope to have you on the show again soon.
It was a pleasure. Anytime.